This is not a highlight video. Roger Federer's season has taken a turn in the last week. 2 days ago, he was upset by Thanasi Kokkinakis in the second round of the Miami Open, but it was actually his first match of the Miami Open, so that makes a two-match losing streak for Roger Federer. It comes on the heels of his Indian Wells final loss to Juan Martín del Potro, and it's the first losing streak of that kind since 2016. So I'm going to get into that match. Although I don't have as much to say about this match as usual, I'm not going to go in as much depth as I usually do for a plethora of reasons, but still going to discuss that match. And then after the match, Federer said that he would skip the clay court season for the second year in a row, so I am going to talk about that as well. So I'm going to get to the Kokkinakis match now. There were a couple things that surprised me. There were a couple of things that didn't surprise me. I'll start with the things that are not so surprising to me. It's not so surprising to me that Roger Federer didn't play his best in this match. First of all, it's a first-round match. A lot of things that work in first-round matches. You hear players talk all the time about first-round jitters. You hear players all the time talk about, getting acclimatized to, new weather conditions, new court conditions, and all that. Okay, so normally your first-round match isn't your best match. That's the first point. Also, coming off of Indian Wells, I think it's the most physical tournament of the year. Most physical 1000s tournament of the season. You got that gritty hard court, which makes for longer rallies, and hard courts in general are awful on your body. So I think it's a very physical tournament. And it was a pretty emotional week as well. The finals was a pretty emotional match. All of this maybe factoring in, maybe not. Federer also had to travel to Miami a lot later than most of the tour, just by nature of being in that final. So I don't expect Federer to play his best match ever in, the second round of the Miami Open. I just don't. So that didn't really surprise me. What did surprise me is that after winning the first set, losing the second set, that he was not able to up his game when he needed to in that third set. He held serve very easily, time and time again in that third set, and then he seemed to be digging into Kokkinakis' service games, and not once was he able to just elevate his game a little bit, get the break, and serve out the match. And that was shocking to me. That was so surprising, because it was very clear that Federer didn't have his best. Very, very clear. But normally, a player like Federer, any player at that level, is able to just kind of elevate themselves when it counts, and still find a way to win. That's what we're used to seeing. And it just didn't happen. He just couldn't. He got to 30 all. He had break points. He just couldn't elevate his game when he needed to. And you could make an argument that the same thing happened against Del Potro, but I won't even go there. That was very, very surprising to me. Federer, after the match, just saying, he felt horrible, saying he didn't play well, obviously, and saying that Nadal deserves to be number one, interestingly enough. In terms of the overall, what do I make of Federer losing in the Indian Wells final and then losing in second round Miami? I don't make too much of it. I think it's a lot easier to overreact here, and I think we should, try to do the best we can to not overreact here. Federer still, in the beginning of 2018, if you would say Federer's going to win the Australian Open, he's going to make the final of Indian Wells, then he's going to get upset at Miami, you completely take that. You take that 7 days of the week. That's kind of a weird saying. I don't know why I chose that saying. Anyway, I think you take that. The only thing that I want to quickly it's more of a question. This isn't much of an opinion, because I haven't done really enough film study or research to really have any conviction on this. But do you feel like Roger Federer is playing less aggressively this season? It's a small concern of mine. The Roger Federer that started implementing saber and mixing in a lot of serve volley and playing with this incredibly aggressive court position and constantly hitting over aggressive backhand returns, constantly finding new ways to be aggressive, whether that be chip and charge, mixing in lots of drop shots to take advantage of his court position, all that stuff. You can make a laundry list of the different ways that Roger Federer can mix it up and play offensive tennis. Do you feel like Federer is sort of regressing into, or I'll just say kind of regressing in his offensive creativity this season? If so, I know that he could, all it would kind of take is a little bit of mental focus on his end to recognize that, decide he wants to change that, and I'm sure he could kind of go back to how he was playing before when it comes to it, at least the way he's playing and his shot selection and that kind of thing. But I do wonder if his coaches kind of give him a tap on his shoulder, Ivan Lubicic and company, and kind of say, remember how you were playing last year, Miami, Indian Wells? I just feel like there's a slight difference in the amount of creativity Federer was showing last year compared to this year. That's the only broad point I'll make. Once again, I don't think that this is that big a deal for Federer, and I don't think we should read that much into it. But this was a puzzling upset. You'll be hard-pressed to find a season where a player doesn't get, even a top player, even a Djokovic season, and Nadal in his prime, an entire season where they are not upset by a player outside the top 100 at least once. I feel like this was sort of comparable to the Tommy Haas upset last season. So you shrug it off, and brings us to our next point. Roger Federer is going to take a little reprieve. He's going to skip the clay court season again. I got to be honest, I thought he would make this decision again, but I wasn't sure after Nadal was having his health problems. You can look at it another way and you can say, well, maybe the only reason Roger Federer would want to play the clay court season is to get another crack at Nadal. Because he's been so successful against Nadal recently, because he went 4-0 against Nadal last year, it would be fascinating to see what would happen if Federer played Nadal on clay right now. I personally think he'd have a shot. I got to see Nadal and, what kind of form he's in, after this, after these recent hip problems, but I think I slightly favor Nadal, very slightly. I think Federer would have a shot. At the same time, Federer has clearly shown some issues with full season or endurance over the course of the full season. I've mentioned this before, but I think I'll reiterate it. There are different kinds of endurance. There's endurance over the course of a point. There's endurance over the course of a match, which is excellent by Roger Federer. When's the last time you've seen him really, really get tired at the end of a match? It's incredible. It happens very, very rarely. Then there's endurance over the course of a tournament, and there's endurance over the course of the season. Federer's endurance over the course of a season is not his strong suit at the ripe age of 36. It's not his strong suit anymore. So I think that he needs to take these long rests, evidenced by the fact that by the time the U.S. Open came around last year, or really just honestly for the last 5 years, I feel like Federer, just by the time the U.S. Open comes around, is a little nicked up and not feeling so great health-wise. It's not an excuse. It's an explanation. It's not an excuse. And I think it's really funny. I'll go off on a little tangent here. I think it's really funny when people comment, like, why are you making excuses for Federer? or why are you making excuses for Nadal or something? It's not an excuse. I'm analyzing why they lose. How is that an excuse? I mean, I don't understand. What do you want me to do? How like these people, how do you want me to say it so it's not an excuse? There's a big difference between an explanation of why someone lost and an excuse, right? I don't know. But people always comment and say I'm making excuses as if I'm Roger Federer. I'm not, like, anyway. That's just a little tangent. Where was I? Where even was I? Oh yeah, so these breaks are necessary for Federer. There are a couple other ways he could approach it. He could play only the major seasons. So basically, he wouldn't play this portion of the season, Indian Wells, Miami. He would come back, play play some tune-ups on the clay, play the French Open, play Wimbledon, and then take a break after Wimbledon, maybe play one tune-up, play the U.S. Open. He could do that because the way he has it right now, the only problem with this is he skips a major. But I feel like that wouldn't work because then you train for the Australian Open, you play the Australian Open, and then already you're taking a long break. That doesn't make much sense. It's not an efficient use of training, right? To just play the Australian Open and then take a break when you're not even feeling that wear and tear yet. I guess the other option, I guess that's the only really other option. What I do want to see him do is I don't want to see him play both the Rogers Cup and Cincinnati. I want him to choose one this year. So he's a little bit healthier going into the U.S. Open. This is something where you can't really criticize Roger Federer anyways. It's like if I said, oh, this player shouldn't retire or this player should retire. To me, that's the worst thing you could possibly talk about because you're not that person. So I don't think anyone really has a right to say Federer should or should not skip the clay court season. But it is a fun thing to talk about. Obviously, it'd be better for us if he played clay, just because I am really curious to see what would happen. But to me, he knows his body. He clearly needs this rest, and he's going to get it. The only thing you could take a look at is, would it make more sense for him to structure his schedule a little bit differently so he could at least play all 4 majors? I don't think it would make sense because this would be the part of the year where he would need to take a break. Because honestly, the French, Wimbledon, the U.S. Open, very close together. Within 3 months, if I'm not mistaken. So you can't really take a month. You can't take a break after Wimbledon unless you're. Yeah, you really can't because you got to play those U.S. Open warm-ups. There's really no other way to do it. No other way to do it. And then he does take a long break normally after the U.S. Open, which I'm sure he'll continue to do. I don't know if there's really much reason for Federer to play Shanghai and Tokyo. I don't know. You can look at his season as a whole and you can say, should he skip? I do think that he should start to skip more 1000s events. But other than that, there's really not much you can say here. You can say it in the comments, though. Big news coming up for the channel, and I'll have a video coming up pretty soon with that news. So stay tuned for that. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.